In the last 30 years, our firm has helped hundreds of people retire before 62, and in that time, I've seen what works, what doesn't, and what most people never figure out until it's too late to change course. What I've noticed is that people who retire early successfully aren't necessarily the ones with the most money. They're the ones who understood a few key things before they pulled the trigger. And the ones who struggled, almost always it came down to the same mistakes. Today, I'm going to share exactly what I've learned, the real lessons from hundreds of early retirement conversations that most people only get access to when they're sitting across from a financial advisor. Before sharing the mistakes that compromise people's retirement, I want to share two very pleasant surprises that almost nobody thinks about before retirement. Surprise number one. In my opinion, most people can retire earlier than they think. The reason I believe this is because in 30 years of working in this business, I have had the privilege of watching people throughout their entire retirement. And the one thing that I've witnessed is people frequently die with more money than what they had when they started the retirement journey. And I attribute this to changing spending patterns as people age throughout retirement. The reason I know this occurs is because I've witnessed it hundreds of times over and over. In addition to personally witnessing this, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does something called consumer expenditure surveys every year. And essentially what they find with these consumer expenditure surveys is that people tend to spend less as their age increases throughout retirement. In addition to that, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, older retirees tend to be happier with their financial situation than when they were younger. So not only have I personally witnessed this consistently over the last 30 years, the data also seems to imply what I've witnessed. So if you're armed with this data, you could potentially retire earlier than you thought possible. The second surprise that I wanted to share that many people don't consider has to do with taxes. Taxes on retirement income is generally friendlier than on working income for a few reasons. Number one, there's no FICA tax on retirement income. Number two, not all of your Social Security will be taxed at the federal level. And number three, depending on the state you reside, you may not have to pay any state income tax on your Social Security income. Finally, if you have Roth IRAs, you don't have to pay any taxes on distributions that are qualified from your Roth IRA. In addition to that, if you have non-qualified accounts, you won't pay any tax on when you're withdrawing the basis from those non-qualified accounts. So at the end of the day, if you have $100,000 of working income versus $100,000 of retirement income, I'll take the $100,000 of retirement income every day of the week for all the reasons that I just mentioned. Now that you understand the biggest surprises, let's go into the lessons I've learned that will help you prevent 4 mistakes we see, including the biggest mistake we see. Mistake number 1 is not saving enough for the lifestyle you desire. And to make sure that you have saved enough, I recommend people create a Monte Carlo retirement income projection. And the way this essentially works is you input all your different sources of income, all of your savings, you assign an amount to the program that you want to spend on an annual basis, and it basically tells you if you have enough money. And the beauty of a Monte Carlo analysis, it assigns a probability of success based on a variety of different potential market scenarios. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you can find Monte Carlo retirement calculators on the internet. Otherwise, if you work with a financial advisor, many financial advisors use Monte Carlo projections, but essentially this will tell you with a pretty decent degree of accuracy if you have a high probability of being able to maintain the lifestyle that you desire throughout retirement. I wanted to show you just kind of a quick example of how this works, and I have a hypothetical here with Steve and Mary. They've recently retired. They need $14,000 per month or $168,000 per year to maintain the quality of life that they desire. Steve's Social Security at 62 is $25,000. Mary's at 62 is $20,000. They have miscellaneous income of $45,000, investments totaling $2.5 million, and Steve's life expectancy isn't quite as long as Mary's because he's had some health issues, so we have him at a 77 for a life expectancy and Mary at 90. But you can see the 98% basically shows us that based on all these different variables, they have a very high likelihood of maintaining the lifestyle they desire. So getting a Monte Carlo analysis should be able to give you the confidence that you can retire when you want to retire. The second mistake that we see a lot of people make is owning the wrong investments in the wrong buckets. And I think it's important to understand the buckets before I go over the mistakes. So imagine you had to put all of your money into one of three buckets. The tax deferred bucket, which would include things like IRAs and 401k plans. Your money goes into this bucket on a pre-tax or a tax deferred basis, or a tax deductible basis rather. It grows tax deferred. But when you withdraw money from this bucket for qualified reasons in retirement, generally 100% of what you withdraw is subject to tax at that time. The second bucket is what I would call the tax-free bucket that would include things like Roth IRAs and Roth 401k plans. You generally don't get a tax advantage when you put money into this bucket, but it grows tax-free, and when the money is taken out for qualified reasons, it comes out tax-free. The final bucket is what we call the non-qualified bucket, and depending on the types of investments you own in this bucket, that will dictate how you pay taxes. There are certain investments that you can own in the non-qualified bucket that are very tax efficient, others that are not very tax efficient. But when you add money to the non-qualified bucket, it doesn't get any of the special tax advantages that the tax deferred and tax-free bucket get. One of the more popular investments that people own in the non-qualified bucket is mutual funds. Mutual funds have something called a tax cost ratio. And the tax cost ratio is defined as the amount that a non-qualified mutual fund's annualized return is reduced by taxes from dividends and distributed capital gains. And on the low end, it could be as low as 0.3% would be very favorable. And on the very high end of the scale, it'd be 5% would be very high, about as high as we've ever seen. What this means is if you have a 1% tax cost ratio and you own a mutual fund in that non-qualified bucket, you're going to be giving up 1% of your return every year to taxes. And the company that determines what the tax cost ratio is and does the due diligence to figure it out is a company called Morningstar. And so you can actually go and find what the tax cost ratio is of your mutual funds, but you definitely want to avoid mutual funds that have high tax cost ratios because it's going to reduce the amount you take home after taxes every year. So if you were to make 10% on a mutual fund that had a 1% tax cost ratio, you're going to end up netting 9% at the end of the year after taxes are considered, which might not seem like a large amount. It might seem trivial, but when you look at this over a retirement time horizon, it's a pretty massive difference that it makes. So if we have somebody that had $1 million in the non-qualified bucket and their tax cost ratio was 0.8%, and we assumed that they made 8% over 30 years. Well, if we were able to just reduce that 0.8% tax cost ratio down to 0.3%, which is essentially saving 0.5% per year, the added value over 30 years is literally over $1 million in tax savings. So again, this might seem trivial at first glance, but over a retirement time horizon, it actually makes a very significant difference. The third mistake that I wanted to go over today is, in addition to owning tax inefficient investments in the non-qualified bucket, there is another big mistake people make between the tax deferred and the tax-free bucket. To illustrate this, I wanted to do a hypothetical example, and I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. And let's just say for this hypothetical example, we have a $2 million portfolio, and $1 million of the $2 million is held in an IRA, and the other $1 million is held in a Roth IRA. And we'll assume for this example that stocks will make 9% on average per year, bonds will make 4% on average per year over a 10-year time horizon. And we'll assume that our hypothetical investor that has this $1 million in the IRA and $1 million in the Roth IRA, they like to have a 50-50 split between stocks and bonds. And you can see that over the 10-year time horizon, both the IRA and the Roth IRA bucket grow to a little over 1.9 million. Collectively, the two buckets grow to a little over 3.8 million. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is Even if we have that same $1 million in the IRA, $1 million in the Roth IRA, but instead of doing 50-50 with both, we just put all the bonds in the IRA and all the stocks in the Roth IRA, we still end up with an overall 50-50 split between stocks and bonds collectively. But you'll notice that the IRA only grows to a little over 1.4 million in this example, and the Roth IRA grows to over 2.3 million. So we end up with the same total between the two buckets because we still have 50% in stocks and 50% in bonds, albeit all the stocks are held in the Roth IRA. So the tax-free bucket grows considerably larger than in the previous example, and the IRA doesn't grow nearly as much, so we end up with way less in the fully taxed bucket, which is a good thing, and way more money in the fully tax-free bucket, which is a good thing. So my point of sharing this with you is, if you do think that stocks will do better over the long run than bonds, wouldn't it make sense to place the stocks in the bucket that will grow the largest amount tax-free and stifle the growth on that bucket that's going to be fully subject to taxation? Now, this leads me to mistake number 4, and the biggest mistake people make. Failure to have a health insurance plan in place before Medicare starts at age 65. So a few popular options for people who are going to be obtaining health insurance post-retirement but pre-Medicare age at 65 is to either go on COBRA insurance or Affordable Care Act insurance, or a state-sponsored version of Affordable Care Act insurance, depending on the state you live in. The thing to know about COBRA insurance is it's generally a temporary solution. It's generally quite expensive. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but I find it makes sense for more people to do Affordable Care Act insurance or a state-sponsored version of Affordable Care Act insurance. However, it depends on everybody's circumstances, but if you're going to be retiring well before 65, COBRA is a temporary option, and for many people that leaves ACA or a state-sponsored version of ACA insurance as the only option to get them to Medicare age. So one of the things that's very important to know about Affordable Care Act insurance is that its pricing is heavily dependent on your modified adjusted gross income. So I'll explain what that means in a little bit, but first I'm going to use an example of how this works in my home county. I live in Eau Claire County. Depending on the county or the state you reside, your numbers are going to be higher or lower than what I share with you, but the general premise will be very similar all around the country, from the perspective that your cost will be heavily influenced by modified adjusted gross income. So again, for a 62-year-old couple in Eau Claire County, modified adjusted gross income of $21,150 equals a premium, an Affordable Care Act premium of a little over $400 per year. So very affordable at that level. If your modified adjusted gross income creeps up to $84,600, you can see the Affordable Care Act premium goes all the way up to $8,426 per year. But what I want you to pay particular attention to is look what happens once that modified adjusted gross income goes up by $1 from $84,600 to $84,601. This is what you'll hear people call the cliff. Once you go over that cliff, you can see your premium increases significantly by, pretty close to $32,000 because your modified adjusted gross income was just $1 extra. So we want to do everything we can to help people avoid the cliff. Now, you might be looking at this thinking, well, gosh, I need more than that to live on an annual basis. That's fine. If you need $300,000, $400,000 a year to live on comfortably, it doesn't mean that your modified adjusted gross income is going to be $300,000 or $400,000, and we'll illustrate why in this next slide. So to understand modified adjusted gross income, it will include things like wages, salary, pay, Social Security income is included, pension income is included, IRA distributions, net business income is included, even municipal bond interest, which is frequently income tax-free for people. It is included in the calculation for modified adjusted gross income as it applies to figuring out what your premium is for Affordable Care Act insurance. All the income and dividends and capital gains that are spit out from that non-qualified bucket, those are all included as well. But more important than what is included in modified adjusted gross income is what is excluded. What is excluded is qualified Roth IRA distributions are completely excluded. And applicable distributions from your non-qualified bucket, the basis of your non-qualified bucket, none of that is included. So as long as you have enough money in the right buckets to provide you the income stream that you need to get you from the day you retire to Medicare age, you can get very affordable health insurance through the Affordable Care Act or a state-sponsored version of the Affordable Care Act, simply by making sure that your buckets are organized correctly before you retire. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I want to know if early retirement is actually possible for me, that's exactly the conversation my team and I have every day. There's a link in the description where you can book a call with us. We'll look at your specific numbers and show you exactly where you stand. No pressure, just clarity. The best advice I can give you if you are within 5 years of retirement is please do not wait to organize your finances. Literally, each year that passes without a proper game plan is a lost opportunity you can't get back. And I can't tell you how many times we meet with people who seek us within a few days of retiring or a few months of retiring, where I can't help but think, man, I wish I would have met you a few years earlier. The sooner you start, the more mistakes you will avoid and the more opportunities you will be able to take advantage of. Now, here's something I've noticed after helping hundreds of people retire before 62. Even when the numbers work, even when everything lines up, some people still can't pull the trigger, and it has almost nothing to do with money. If that sounds like you, I made a video about exactly what's really going on and what I've seen actually help people make the leap. You can watch it right here. I'll see you there.